across. So in year one, I want to say equals. I'm scrolling up to my source and use tab. And I want to link to cell I-17 on the source and use tab, 7%, and then hit F4 to lock. Hit enter, and then fill that across to the right, F9 to recalc. And in year one, right now, you should have 4.2 million of interest, 8.3 in year two, 8.2, 8.0, 7.6 in year five. Again, make sure you lock. If you don't lock, your interest rate will be wrong in those last 4 years. Anyone still need a minute? Okay, let's go to the term loan. All right, same thing here. The term loan, if we look at our beginning balance, it's referring to that old balance sheet. Just like I did with my revolver, I want to link this to my pro forma balance sheet. I want to say equals, and it's going to be H74 at 120 million. And I'm only doing that in year one. Again, year 2, 3, 4, and 5 are just linked to the prior year's ending balance right there. So we just need to update year one. In the case of the term loan, however, I do need to change my amortization. And we didn't talk about that yesterday. We didn't do anything about that yesterday. But if we look at our instructions page, under the sources section on page 1, we talk about the term loan. The last line in that section says amortize $20 million for 4 years and then pay off the balance at the end of year 5. All right, so we are going to fully amortize the term loan down to 0. If we look at our amortization schedule right now, the first 4 years are correct, right? But in year 5, when I hit F9 to recalc, okay, we still have another 20 million that we need to pay down. And so what I want to do, because this is how we've set it up, is I want to go back to my assumptions tab. I want to go down to row 45 on the assumptions tab. And in my term loan amortization, what I want to say is I want to change year 5, instead of 20, I want to change that to 40. So I know that's my ending balance, or my beginning balance in year 5. I want to fully amortize that. We'll just change that last year to 40. When we hit F9 to recalc, now our term loan does indeed get paid down to 0 by the end of year 5. Then our ending balances do not change, at least the formulas don't change. Those are correct. But just like with the revolver, we need to change the interest rate. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I want to say equals, go up to my source and use, cell I-18, I-18, hit F4 to lock. We want to capture that 7.5%, and then we'll copy that across for each of the 4 years. Fill that across to the right. Hit F9 to recalc. Make sure that you do have 7.5% every year. Make sure you locked on that cell properly. And our interest expense calculation, no changes required there. Just like before, just like last week, it'll calculate based on an average balance methodology. And as we pay down more and more of our term loan, our interest gets lower and lower every year. 8.3 in year 1, going down to 1.5 million by year 5. Any questions? Anybody still need a minute? Okay, well, the next line item in our debt schedule so far is this unsecured debt. All right, we need to, before we can do our unsecured debt, we actually need to insert some rows so we can accommodate our senior bonds. So I want to insert actually 7 rows. So if you highlight if you put your cursor on cell A138, hold down Shift, down arrow 6 times, Alt-IR, insert 7 rows at a time. Now rather than typing everything out, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to copy the text from up above for my term loan. I'm going to copy all these items, I'm going to paste them down here, and then I'll do a find and replace and just replace the term loan with senior bonds. Saves me some time, saves me from probably making several mistakes in the typing. So Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste. And then before I do a find and replace, make sure we only select, Brian, these, these 7 cells here where we just pasted. Control H. And what I want to do is find what? I'm going to find the term or the phrase term loan. I want to replace that with senior bonds. And replace all. And your debt schedule, the text in that section should now be updated. We've got a section for senior bonds. Next thing I want to do before I start putting numbers in here or putting formulas in is I actually want to copy the formatting from my term loan section as well. All right, this will just save me time later on from having to go in and reformat every single line item here. So I want to select those 5 projected years for my term loan, Control C to copy. I want to move my cursor down to I-139, which is the first line of our senior bonds debt schedule. And I want to type Alt-E-S-T, paste special formats. I'm pasting, but all I'm pasting are the formats. As we talked about yesterday, it's the same thing if you're used to using that paintbrush icon. Right? This is the keyboard shortcut to doing that. Just paste special formats. Okay. Well, let's start creating our debt schedule for the senior bonds. Senior bonds beginning balance, I want to say equals. I'm going to scroll up to cell H75. Just like I did with my revolver and term loan, I want to take this from my pro forma balance sheet. So I want to pick up cell H75, that 90 million. Okay, for my pay down drawdown, if we look at our instructions page, we have no amortization on these bonds. But like I said last week, I don't want any hard codes in this. On my model tab, this needs to be output. The way I'm going to incorporate this is I'm going to go back to my assumptions tab. And what I'm going to do is between my term loan amortization in row 45 and my unsecured debt amortization in row 46, I'm going to insert a line item for my senior bonds amortization. So highlight or put your cursor in row 46, Alt-IR to insert a row, and type senior bonds amortization. You can see why I don't normally type. And for each year, I just want to enter 0. As I alluded to last week, we try and set up our model to be as flexible as possible. As you get into a real live deal, deal terms change. Debt terms change. Nothing is set in stone until a deal is closed. So if there's a change in our amortization, the way I'm setting up our model is that I can quickly and easily enter it here, and then that will automatically flow through to my model tab. So once we have that, let's go back to our model tab. And what we want to do is say in cell I-140, my pay down or drawdown in year 1, I want to say minus, control page up, H46 on the assumptions tab. That amortization that we just specified on our assumptions tab. And we can fill that across to the right for each year. Senior bonds ending balance year 1. We'll just take the sum of the 2 items above. And the way we set it up, we can actually do that Alt equals as our shortcut for a sum function. So Alt equals will just give us the sum of those 2 numbers in I-139 and I-140. We can fill that across to the right as well. And then for our beginning balance in years 2, 3, 4, and 5, we're going to set this up the same way we did for our revolver and term loan. Beginning balance in any particular year simply equal to last year's ending balance. So for year 2, we'll say equals I-141. And then we'll fill that across to the right 3 cells. All right, well, let's specify our interest rate. Again, linking back to the source and use. In this case, cell I-19. Make sure we lock on that, so F4 to lock. We'll fill that across to the right. We should have 9.5% in every year. And then for our interest expense calculation, we can actually just copy our formulas down from our term loan section. Control C to copy, Control V to paste. because these are all set up in the same order. These formulas just can be copied down. And when you copy those, hit F9 to recalc, you should get 8.6 million of interest every year for the senior bonds. 90 million times 9.5%. All right, let's do our unsecured debt. First of all, our beginning balance, same exercise as we've done before. We're going to link to our pro forma balance sheet. I want to link to H76, that's 60 million. If you hit F9 to recalc, you should see 60 million straight across. Beginning balance, no amortization, 60 million ending balance. When we get to the interest rate section here, remember this unsecured debt, interest is going to be paid in kind on this. But what I want to do is I want to set this up two ways. I want to set it up so that we can either have the unsecured debt pay interest in cash or in kind. Here's what I want to do. I want to go to row A151 and I want to insert two rows. And I want to copy the text in cells A149 and A150, the interest rate expense and interest rate, or interest rate and interest expense, those two line items, Control-C to copy, and I want to paste those into the two new rows that we just entered, or that we inserted. And now what I want to do is I want to go back into cell A149, hit F2, I want to move my cursor, you should see your cursor flashing here, move it back to the beginning of that cell, and right before interest rate, I want you to type cash. And I want you to do that in the next cell as well, so that the first one reads cash interest rate, the second reads cash interest expense. Now in A151, I want to do the same thing, but instead of saying cash interest rate, I want to say PIK interest rate. Capital P-I-K stands for pay in kind. And I want to do that in cell A152 as well. And now we've got the option. We can set up our unsecured debt to have cash interest. We can set up our unsecured debt to have PIK interest. Let's move on. Cash interest rate, year one. Don't just zero this out. Let's link back to our source and use. I'll say equals. And we want to pick up cell I-20 on our source and use. That cash pay interest rate for the unsecured notes is 0% right now. So I-20, lock on that, fill that to the right, F9 to recalc, and your cash interest expense should go to 0 in every year. Now the next thing I want to do before I fill in my PIK interest expense and my PIK interest rate, I want to copy and paste the formats from my cash interest rate and cash interest expense line. When I inserted the rows below here, that $ format applies to both of these new rows, but the first one needs to be a percentage. Actually, you can just copy the first. If you just copy the cash interest rate line from your from row I-140 from row 149, Control-C to copy, Alt-E-S-T as in Thomas, paste formats, paste special formats. Now this new PIK interest rate row will be formatted with a percentage. A moment ago it was formatted with $signs. Let's specify our PIK interest rate. Let's go back to our source and use. And I want to select cell J20, our 10% PIK interest rate. I'm going to hit F4 to lock on that. Fill that across to the right. Hit F9 to recalc. You should have 10% in every year. And now we can calculate our PIK interest expense. PIK interest expense is going to be calculated a little differently than how we calculate cash interest. Cash interest, remember, is calculated based on using an average balance, average of the ending and beginning. PIK interest we're going to calculate off of the beginning balance. So what I want to say here is equals beginning balance, or I-146, times I-151, should get 6 million, and I want to fill that across to the right. Right now you should have PIK interest expense of 6 million in every year, so far. All right, but conceptually, this doesn't really make sense yet. Remember what we said about PIK interest is it gets accrued and added on to each year's ending balance. All right, we need to make one more change here to reflect that. For the unsecured debt ending balance, I want to hit F2, so I want to edit this cell. And right now it's saying beginning balance plus any pay down or drawdown. On the end of that formula, I want to add in the PIK interest. I want to say plus, and then if you hit F2 again, then you can use your arrow key and move around. But at the end of that cell, I want to say plus I-152, PIK interest. Remember, PIK debt is like a negative amortizing loan. The balance gets bigger and bigger every year to include that interest expense. And once we have that in year one, we'll fill that across to the right. And you should see, if you've done this correctly, you should see your PIK or your unsecured debt ending balance growing from $66 million in year one to $96.6 million by the end of year 5. Just adding that interest every year, paying interest on interest. Well, as we talked about before, we've set this up to be either, we can set it up so it's either interest is paid in cash or PIK. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you an example. You don't need to do this on your own, but just follow what I'm doing on the screen. Let's say we're going through, the deal terms are ever changing, and for whatever reason the lender comes back and says, you know what, PIK is out, we're not doing PIK anymore, interest is going to need to be paid in cash. Well, the way we've set this up is we can make a very quick switch here on our source and use tab. We can change our cash interest rate to 10%. Let's zero out our PIK interest rate. Go back to our model, F9 to recalc. And now we see that we're bearing interest in cash, not PIK. Because that interest is getting paid in cash, the balance stays the same. It's no longer increasing as it was in the PIK scenario. All right, so that's a really easy way that we've built some flexibility into our model to account for either cash or PIK as the situation dictates. So change those back to my model, F9 to recalc. My PIK interest rolls back in, and we see it just the way it was set up a minute ago. All right, everybody understand how we did that? Makes sense? You now know how to model PIK interest. It's pretty easy once you learn how to do it. There's one more thing, actually a couple more steps we're going to have to take into account in our cash flow in a moment. I talked about one, we'll talk about the other in a moment as well. All right. But at this point, all 4 pieces of debt have been completed. Last couple things we need to do in our debt schedule, we need to calculate our total interest expense. We're going to add a line item to distinguish between total interest and cash interest. And then we need to recalculate our interest earned on, or change the formula for our interest earned on cash item. All right, first things first, we'll look at total interest expense. If I look at this formula, right now this formula is taking into account only 3 items. All right, it's taking into account interest on the revolver, interest on the term loan, and cash interest on the unsecured debt. All right, which was right before, but now we have 4 pieces of debt, and now one of those pieces of debt also has PIK interest. So we